Hey everyone, today we're going to cover the last section of the cardiovascular system. And this section is all going to be about the developmental aspects of the cardiovascular system, starting when you are just an embryo or fetus within your mother's stomach, all the way until you become an older adult. So, in an embryo, the heart develops as a single tube and pumps blood by week 4 of pregnancy. So, about the time, if not earlier, than usually most women find out that they're pregnant, their baby already has some form of a heart that is pumping blood. Now, the heart becomes a four-chambered organ capable of acting as a double pump, pumping both to the body and to the lungs over the next 3 weeks. So, if we have week 4 and then over the next 3 weeks, that's a total of by week 7, we already have a four-chambered heart. Now, that's all fine and dandy. However, the lungs and digestive system are immature and they don't function in a fetus. In fact, all nutrients, excretory, so waste, and gas exchange, oxygen and carbon dioxide, occurs through something known as the placenta. The placenta is attached to the uterine wall of the mother, and the placenta is connected to the fetus through an umbilical cord. So, in a sense, basically all the baby's nutrients, how they get rid of waste, and the gas exchange all comes from the mother. So the umbilical cord carries nutrients and oxygen from maternal blood, so the mother's blood, to the baby's blood. And then that baby's waste goes from the baby's blood to the mother's blood, where the mother will excrete it herself. The umbilical cord is made up of 3 blood vessels. One is an umbilical vein, and 2 of them are called umbilical arteries. Now, the difference is the vein actually carries nutrient and oxygen-rich blood to the fetus. Now, this is a little bit different because usually you think of veins being oxygen poor, but here it's oxygen rich. So please notice that difference. Okay. So it's going to go to the fetus because it's going to the heart. 2 umbilical arteries carry waste and carbon dioxide blood from the fetus to the placenta, where the mother would get rid of the waste and breathe out the carbon dioxide and get rid of it. So over here, we have the placenta in this picture. So I just want to point that out. The big, huge, dark red, which means high oxygen, is going to be your umbilical cord. This branches off into your umbilical vein, which has high oxygenation. And then you have your umbilical arteries down here, which is light pink, which says it has low oxygenation. Okay. So what happens because the lungs and the livers are not fully developed? Well, shunts are created that bypasses the lungs and the livers that are in the fetus. So that means blood does not pass through the lungs, blood does not pass through the liver. They are directed elsewhere. So if we were going to talk about the liver first, which is why it's bolded red and underlined, the way it bypasses the liver is blood flow bypasses the liver through something called the ductus venosus and enters into the inferior vena cava, where it goes into the right atrium of the heart. Okay. So if we were going to look at this picture, here is your ductus venosus. So we have our vein coming it back. And then this light shadowed organ behind here is the liver. So I'm going to make a little line. What it does, instead of going into the liver, it completely bypasses it. And it goes straight into your inferior vena cava, which dumps out into your right atrium. Notice here that purple doesn't mean oxygen poor. It means moderate oxygen. So there's still oxygen in that blood. The other thing that I want you to understand is down here they have a little table, if you don't like looking at the picture, where it says placenta to the umbilical vein, through your ductus venosus into your inferior vena cava, straight to your right atrium. So they have right here a little outline of what's happening. Okay. What happens when they bypass the lungs? Well, there are actually 2 major things or structures that fetuses have in order to bypass the lungs. First, blood that comes into the right atrium is shunted directly into the left atrium to be pumped to the rest of the body. So it doesn't go down to the right ventricle to go to the lungs at all. Blood goes from the right atrium to the left atrium through something known as the foramen ovale or veil. This becomes the fossa ovalis at or after birth, because what happens is this opening will close once you're born because there is no reason to bypass the lungs anymore. If this valve does not close, or this hole does not close, sometimes you guys can have a heart murmur or other congenital defects happen. Sometimes there's major issues, and then sometimes there's no issues at all. So the foramen ovale or veil, this is a flap-like opening in the interatrial septum. So remember, the septum divides the atrium, and interatrial is between the two atrium. Now, not all blood flows through this hole. Some blood does manage to get down to the right ventricle. So when it gets down into the right ventricle, there's another structure in place known as the ductus arteriosus. This connects the aorta and the pulmonary trunk. So if things do go down into that right ventricle and they go to get pumped out of the pulmonary trunk, it is shunted over to the aorta to actually go to the rest of the body. This again has to close whenever you are born and becomes a structure known as the ligamentum arteriosum. Again, this structure helps blood that enter the right ventricle bypass the lungs. So let's look at this picture and kind of see up here. Gotta find it. I know it's gotta be. Here we have the ductus arteriosus, and then here we have the foramen ovale. So here, if we have blood come right into this right atrium, there's a little hole here that shunts it directly over to your left atrium, where then it'll go down into your left ventricle, and then it'll go out your aorta to the rest of your body. If it does manage to not go through that hole and it does go down here into your right atrium, and it does manage to go out your pulmonary trunk, we have this ductus arteriosus right here that bypasses it and sends it directly to the aorta to go to the rest of the body. If you don't like looking at that picture, down here we have this little flow diagram where it says right ventricle, pulmonary trunk, ductus arteriosus gets it and sends it to the aorta. Or right atrium through the foramen ovale to the left atrium to the left ventricle straight to the aorta, where it goes through the umbilical arteries and then goes back to the placenta to get oxygen. So we did talk about those two openings, and sometimes not all of them close, and this results in congenital heart defects, which account for half of infant deaths resulting from all congenital defects. There are environmental interferences that are a major cause, such as if the mother has an infection or she gets sick while pregnant, if there's drugs, but sometimes defects happen without no rhyme or reason. They just do. So defects include when the ductus arteriosus does not close, there's septal openings like that foramen ovale, or any other structural abnormalities. These can usually be corrected surgically if needed, but most of the time, sometimes they don't even cause that much of an effect on the individual. Now, in the absence that there is no congenital heart problems, usually the heart functions pretty smoothly throughout a long lifetime for most people. We have homeostatic mechanisms in place, so we are rarely aware when our heart is overworking or working harder. Now, regular aerobic exercise is important for your heart as you become older. It actually helps the heart become more powerful and a more efficient pump to help clear out any fatty deposits from blood vessel walls. Now, there are age-related problems associated with cardiovascular system. Over time, your valves in your veins are going to weaken. Remember, those are important to get blood back up to your heart. And then sometimes you can develop varicose veins, where basically blood pools down in your lower extremities, and then your legs begin to swell. So usually with varicose veins, you'll see your lower legs swell. This is usually a problem for people who are up on their feet a lot, or for mothers going through pregnancy and they have that extra weight down on their legs as well. You can also develop something known as arteriosclerosis. This is hardening of the arteries where they lose elasticity or their ability to stretch. So this doesn't allow the heart to pump blood as efficiently. You can develop hypertension because of the loss of elasticity, and about 30% of the population in, that's supposed to say US, has hypertension usually by age 50. And then there's things called coronary artery disease that results from fatty calcified deposits. So if you have a diet that's really high in fat, really high in salt, anything really high in cholesterol. Now, cardiovascular diseases cause more than one half of the deaths in people over the age of 65. Most researchers actually believe that diet, not aging, is actually the contributing factor to cardiovascular disease, especially in the time where we have a lot of fast foods like McDonald's, Arby's, Steak and Shake, even just the portion sizes that we get nowadays. Some agree that the risk would be lowered. You wouldn't have as much cardiovascular or heart disease if people ate less animal fat, less things that have bad cholesterol, and a diet that was low in salt. Other researchers said not only do you have to worry about diet, but you also need to include in avoiding stress because stress makes your heart pump and work harder. You want to eliminate cigarette smoking, and you want to take part in a regular moderate exercise program. You want to keep up your exercise so your heart is pumping efficiently, so your heart is actually getting used and you're clearing out that fatty deposit that's in your blood vessels. So that's the end of today's lesson. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be more than happy to help. Have a good day.